Meckler, the president of the Convention of States. Very interesting to see, Mark, that Amazon now attacking with one of its documentaries this very idea of coming together to make our constitutional republic an even better place to live.
Yeah, it was kind of a shocking thing to find out about last week. I had no idea this was going on. They certainly didn't approach anybody from our organization. But I was actually told by somebody in the White House that this existed. They pointed me to the clip. And for some reason, they've decided this is the great threat to our Constitution. They're actually attempting to use constitutional process.
Now, why is it so important to not only call for a convention like this, but our federalist system in the constitutional apparatus of our great country? In other words, states' rights and the fact that we have laboratories of democracy, 50 states, 6 territories, so that the federal government can look and say, oh, wow, that's actually a great idea. And you could point to several examples of this in our nearly 250-year history.
Yeah, look, this clause in Article 5 was put in there during the convention in 1787 because the states understood that eventually the federal government would become tyrannical and try to override the people's will. And they wanted the states to have the opportunity to rise up peacefully, actually, just by calling a convention, gathering, and proposing amendments to restrain federal tyranny. And I think that what's going on, why we're seeing this make its way into the mainstream culture through this Amazon Prime documentary, is that the left, the radical left, is afraid of this. They are inherently statist. They don't like the idea of federalism. They want to be able to control everything from the top down. So the idea of dispersing power around the country to all 50 states is something they're inherently opposed to.
And why do you think that is? Is it because of this globalist uniparty movement? Is it simply a structure of control? Is it making money? Or is it a refusal just simply not to look on the other side, even if there is, a valid point of disagreement?
Yeah, I actually think it's all of the above. I mean, everything you described is part of this system now where the federal government has grown beyond its constitutional boundaries. The framers knew this would happen. And the reason they knew it would happen is it's not that they had a crystal ball. They understood human nature. This is what human beings do. They conglomerate power to themselves. When they get power, they want more power. That's just human nature, like I said. And so they provided this relief mechanism to blow us out of a situation like this. And I do believe that there are globalists involved that don't want this to happen. People like the Chamber of Commerce, U.S. Chamber of Commerce wouldn't want this to happen. Any big organizations that derive their power from lobbying in Washington, D.C., it becomes more difficult for them if the power is dispersed to the state legislatures.
And they call it shiny, happy people. It's almost as if they're talking down to us.
Yeah. Look, and the reason for that title, this is a documentary show, apparently. I just found this out in the last week. I was unfamiliar. It's their #1 documentary show. It started last year. Their first season was an expose on a Christian family by the name of the Duggar family. And there were some very serious allegations and charges, I think even convictions of child abuse in that family. And so this family was elevated by Amazon in order to attack Christians. This is the main purpose of the show, as far as I can tell, to paint with a broad brush anybody who does anything bad. The second season has nothing to do with the Duggar family. It's about a Christian camp back in the 90s, a teen camp, part of the Christian evangelical movement that they're attacking. I'm unfamiliar with the camp or the movement. And the odd part is that they just kind of plop Convention of States down in the middle of this. We have nothing to do with this teen camp. Convention of States didn't exist in the 90s, but they just sort of throw this out gratuitously in a 3-minute segment attacking Convention of States.
And tell us more about the Convention of States for viewers who might not be familiar with it. What are some of the goals, and ultimately, what are you seeking to do as the president of the organization to bring that sound Bill of Rights, common sense, and the framers' vision into 2025?
So Article 5 of the Constitution contains the ways in which we're allowed to amend our Constitution. One way is when Congress proposes an amendment. Takes 2/3 of both houses, and that's how we've gotten all of our amendments. The second way is when the states decide to gather in convention. It takes 2/3 of the states, or 34 states, to call for that convention. So far, 19 have done so. When we reach that 34 state threshold, the states will gather, and what they'll discuss is amendments that would control the federal government fiscally. In other words, impose potentially a balanced budget amendment, tax caps, spending caps, things like that. Second would be anything that would impose term limits, not just on Congress, but it could be on the bureaucrats and the staffers in the DC, what we now know as the deep state. And third is anything that would take and limit the scope, power, or jurisdiction of the federal government, return that scope, power, and jurisdiction to the people in the states. So these are things that the vast majority of Americans support. They're very common sense. They're not partisan. They would return an equal amount of power to any state, whether you're talking about New York or Texas. So this is something that all Americans should support.
Now, is there any fear if this convention would be called and then big government items would get into it? So say that some of the delegates there might look at Washington, D.C. and say, oh, it's not centralized enough. Let's even grow it some more. Is there a possibility of that happening?
I think there is fear, and that fear has been imposed by the radical left in America. Over 250 leftist groups from Planned Parenthood to La Raza and MoveOn.org have signed a press release against what we're doing. But the reality is, by the terms of the convention itself and the applications made by the state, the only things they can talk about are things that limit the scope, power, and jurisdiction of the federal government, impose fiscal restraints, or impose term limits on Washington, D.C. So it is a very limited agenda that could be discussed at the convention.
And how is there a way to counter this Amazon documentary? Is it something that could be produced by, say, a right of center organization, or maybe something at the Convention of States to actually showcase, if that does call into convention at the time, what's actually happening there, and that it has nothing to do with, this Christian camp that may have been left, right, or center back in the 90s, well before this movement was organized?
Yeah, I think it's very hard for folks on the right to strike at the heart of mainstream culture. And really, honestly, we don't feel a need to counter this. Actually, I think this was excellent for our organization. It brought attention to the idea of a convention of states to mainstream, what I would describe as Hollywood left America, people who might not know about this at all. So we're pretty happy with it. The folks who support convention of states found a lot of humor in it and actually really enjoyed it.
It's a really good point, Mark, because it reminds me of the Book of Mormon, the musical. It's produced by the South Park creators. And I noticed going to see that show that the Mormon Church, the Latter-day Saints, put together ads and said, if you have questions, come see us. It was a brilliant, masterful marketing that took place. And in many times, it's almost name ID for the other side or someone you're trying to humiliate or put down. And in the process, well, why not come see what we're all about? And then in return, Americans become curious about this rather extraordinary movement.
Yeah, and I think this is really important for folks on the right to understand that the left has lost a large part of its cultural sway. And when they attack us, one of the things that it does is it shows us that we're definitely over the target. So for our 5 million plus folks out there across the country, for people that were watching on social media who are conservatives, they're looking at this and thinking, well, if the left is attacking this, maybe it's something I ought to take a look at.
And you have some very big endorsements coming from the vice president, the House Speaker, and some others who are looking to maybe get this going and actually have, again, power returning back to the states as it was originally intended.
Yeah, we've been incredibly blessed over the years. I mean, in this administration, as you said, we have J.D. Vance, we have Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Secretary of Agriculture Brooke Rollins, Mike Huckabee, who is now the ambassador to Israel, Caroline Leavitt, I think the best press secretary in modern history. All of these folks came into the administration already supporting Convention of States. So we have a very broad and deep bench of Convention of States supporters that are well known to the American public.
So as you try to reach that 34 state threshold, first, can you share how that might happen, the process of getting to that point, but also, do you believe that maybe getting some of these agencies out into America away from K Street can kind of break up the lobbying firms in order for these cabinet secretaries, which many of them, it's impressive because not only subject matter experts in bringing common sense back to government, but they've been governors, they've been in media, they know the departments they're dealing with, so they're bringing that Main Street to K Street. But would it not be nice to see, say, the Department of Agriculture in somewhere like South Dakota or Texas and start getting these agencies out into what I like to call real America?
Yeah, I really appreciate that effort being taken by the Trump administration. I know the USDA just laid off a bunch of people and they're going to move a bunch of their offices out around the country. I know that's been done during the first Trump administration with the Department of the Interior. And I think that is a very healthy thing for the United States of America. the people who make these decisions should be living in the areas that are most affected by these decisions. But this is a really important caveat to all of that. I'm afraid that post-Trump administration, if we have another leftist administration, which our politics swing back and forth, eventually we will, that they'll just reconsolidate those agencies in Washington, D.C., and they'll grow them more than ever before. And this is one of the reasons I think calling a convention of states is so necessary. I'll give you a specific example. President Trump has talked about doing away with the Department of Education. I know he and the secretary are working very hard to do that. Even if they get it done, the next time there's a Democrat administration, they'll just re-up that Department of Education. We want to make that permanently constitutionally impossible. The Constitution should have language in it that prohibits the federal government from being involved in our education system in any way. And if we do that, that's how you put the lid on this forever.
We know that President Reagan stated that before, as it was his goal post-Carter administration and something that they could not achieve, that the closest thing to eternal life on earth is a government program. And countless things that were supposed to be temporary, gosh, really since 1913, this modern progressive movement and the implementation of the federal income tax leading to Social Security and other so-called safety nets that have now been a big doom and gloom umbrella over our constitutional foundation. And now I find this very interesting as well, Mark. Most of the states, have they not somewhat adopted either term limits, a balanced budget amendment? Many of these legislators have to go there for a short period of time and actually produce a balanced budget. And you have those amendments in state constitutions. So it seems as if these laboratories of democracy, they end up getting it right, while our federal government, now $36 trillion in debt and counting, with the average American owing nearly $110,000 per the debt, and that includes people under 18.
Yeah, the vast majority of states have figured out a lot of this stuff. And there are simple things, and we're talking about the big things like a balanced budget amendment or term limits. There are very simple things that are supported by the American people. For example, most states have something either constitutionally or by statute called a single subject amendment or a single subject rule that says you can't have these 2,000-page bills. They have single subject bills that are put out there for an up or down vote. That's the way our federal government should operate, and we could pass a single subject amendment. Another one is our Supreme Court. People are nervous about the idea of packing the Supreme Court. The left has said they will absolutely do this if they take power again. They will do away with the filibuster. They'll pack the Supreme Court. Well, we could, I think, easily pass an amendment to limit the Supreme Court to 9. Another subject that's pretty hot right now is the idea of anchor babies under the 14th Amendment. Clearly, the 14th Amendment was not meant to allow people to just come in, have a baby, and that baby is automatically a citizen. And we can clarify that through an amendment, which would be supported by the vast majority of Americans.
So interesting to dive deep into these issues. I'm curious as well, Mark, with your background, not only in the Convention of States and also the Tea Party Patriots, what are your thoughts on the One Big Beautiful Bill? Because we saw a lot of good there. There were some concerns about how large it was, but now you start seeing rescissions happening, and specifically with the $9 billion regarding PBS, NPR, and public funding of truly state media. And when I grew up, it was Sesame Street teaching you the basics, the ABCs, the golden rule, how to treat one another. Now it's transgender story hour. How's your approach to, or your grade more or less, regarding Republicans' approach to legislation in this golden era?
Yeah, if I were to give it a grade, I'd give it a solid B, and especially for effort. Look, I just don't think they could have gotten anything else done in this era of such a slim majority. I just think it's very difficult, and people have to understand threading the needle in the way that Speaker Johnson did and Leader Thune, I think, is really incredible. I'm a big supporter of especially Mike Johnson. I think he's the most conservative speaker to hold the gavel in my lifetime, but they could only do so much. I don't think bills can be big and beautiful, so I think this one was big and not so beautiful, but I also think the best we could expect under the circumstances. I also want to say, I think this is the best reason we need a convention of states. When you look, we have control over all three branches of government, alleged conservatives, and this is the best we can get. This is why the people need to intervene.
Mark Meckler, the president of Convention of States. Sir, where can people help support the effort, and what are you looking to achieve in the next, or the rest of the year? Let's look to the end of it, and where can people help support this great cause?
Yeah, people can go to conventionofstates.com and get signed up to support the cause. They can follow me on X at Mark Meckler. And I expect that we're going to pass a couple more states by the end of the year. I'm looking forward to North Carolina and perhaps Ohio. Those are probably the two on my most up-and-coming target list.
Very exciting. And before we part, is it really a Republican or Democrat issue? What are you finding out there as you break bread with everyone wanting to bring constitutional common sense back to our great republic?
We've polled this nationally, and it's over 2/3 of people. It doesn't matter what state we're in. It doesn't matter what party we're talking about. When you explain to people what we're trying to do, they realize it's a nonpartisan effort, and they're engaged.
Please join us again on The Voice of Reason. Mark Meckler with the Convention of States. We'll see you soon.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you to Mark Meckler for joining us on The Voice of Reason. The Convention of States action, something that is endorsed by Vice President J.D. Vance and also Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, as well as countless state and local leaders. Time for our federal government to live under the authority of the Constitution, and now we are returning to those constitutional times and those breakdowns of what is proper in Article 1, Article 2, and Article 3, and God willing, we can bring down some of this $36 trillion of debt. That's roughly $110,000 of debt that each person owes because of the incompetence of the uniparty. It's people who are not able to vote yet, including minors in this country. $110,000 each, roughly. I'm sure that you can add that into your budget, right?
The question before the court today: is the American two-party system guilty or innocent of giving Americans the illusion of a choice at the ballot box? Here to present their cases, President of the Convention of States, Mark Meckler, along with Reason editor and host of Rising, Robbie Schwab. Nice to see both of you, gentlemen. First, each of you gets a minute for your opening statements. And Mark, we're going to start with you. You go first. 1 minute.
The idea of a third party has long been seen as a panacea in an American political system where the people are frustrated. But history tells us otherwise. It's not since the Republican Party was born well over 100 years ago has there been a successful third party effort in America. And in fact, most often third-party efforts end up as spoilers and hurt the party and the people that they were most intended to help. We live in a time that's no different than that. The idea of a third party actually working in this country is made impossible by the laws that have been passed by incumbents. Ballot access is very difficult. Raising the money is very difficult. Getting the voter to switch their primary party loyalties has proven to be almost impossible. On average, about 0.2% of independent or third-party candidates win their elections. I understand people's frustration, but this is not a successful strategy for reforming our political system.
All right, Robbie, you make your opening statement, sir. Go ahead.
Well, I certainly agree that our system favors two parties, and I would be in favor of reforms that make it easier for alternative parties and third parties to thrive. I think that would be to our benefit. But I would argue that even if existing third parties have had very little success at the ballot box, even by pressuring the two major parties to listen to their issues, to listen to the people, to listen to those with a different perspective, I would say that is beneficial in and of itself. I would argue that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. pressured Trump and the Republican Party to pay attention to some of his issues in a way that was beneficial for the health of the Trump movement. And overall, I would say, look, we are stuck in a position where both the two major parties, the dominant system, the people, for instance, in the Republican Party can say, we will do nothing to fulfill our promises to you. They've been promising my entire life on deficit, on debts. I'm 36 years old. Every time Republicans run for office, they say, give us power and we will fix the debt and the deficit. And then they don't do it. And they say, what are you going to do? For Democrats, another challenge competition would help.
Understood. Understood. Okay, that is it for opening statements. Now, both the advocates, folks, will make the case, will present evidence to bolster their case. Again, we're looking at, is the two-party system guilty of pulling the wool over the American people's eyes? Mark, 2 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, look, I want to be clear. I do think there is some measure that the two-party system is guilty of pulling the wool over the American people's eyes. The question is, what's the proper solution to the damage being caused by a two-party system. I also agree with Robbie that the idea of reforms to our system that would allow it to be easier for a third party to arise would be a good idea. But again, I live in the world of political reality, not political fantasy. Those who make the laws are those who actually benefit from a two-party system. The idea that any incumbent or a ruling party of incumbents is going to reform the system to make it easier for people to challenge the power status quo, again, that's just electoral fantasy. It's not going to happen. So the question is, what's the proper method to attack the problem of a two-party system that seems unresponsive to the people? Again, to play into political reality, I want to remind people the Republicans have a bare, very slim, historically slim majority. There's only so much a party with a slim majority can do. I think the better solution is reform the party from within.
Okay, yeah, and the Democrats, whenever they have the similar thin majority, don't seem to be encumbered by all of those limitations. Robbie, make your case. Why do you think the two-party system may have been pulling the wool over our people's eyes?
Well, I think the reason we're talking about this is because of what Elon Musk is doing at this moment, and I would argue it is beneficial. Elon Musk is calling out the Republican Party for, again, disappointing its own voters, fundamentally on the question of debt and deficits, and perhaps on some other issues. Elon is saying this is what the Republican Party ran on doing, and if it is not going to do that, I am going to be interested in creating a party that will be for people who think that that was not a promise easily broken. Now, is this party going to somehow achieve electoral dominance or be competitive? I would argue that that is very unlikely under our current system. And it sounds like both of us think the system should be changed to make it, more like other democracies or parliamentary democracies where you have a range of parties and they form some kind of coalition. So you don't have it splitting the vote and you get your enemies in power, but you can exercise and say, I want this policy and not this policy, while still being on the right or in whatever your movement is. But if Elon only makes the Republican Party less likely to break its commitment, its promise to its voters next time around, I would argue it is occasionally worth paying a short-term political price to say, no, we meant business. You said, you promised us you would do this thing. You didn't do it. So then we gave 2% of the vote, 5% of the vote to another party. You learned your lesson. Next time, listen to us. I would say that would be worth it in the short term if it achieved the long-term goal on this important fundamental issue of the debt and the deficit.
All right, gentlemen, we're into the part of Chris's court where your closing arguments are being offered. Mark, 1 minute, go.
Yeah, I will refute what Robbie just said. What he said was that it's okay to throw an election to teach the party a lesson. The Democrats have told us what they will do the next time they take power. They have said they will end the filibuster. They said they will pack the Supreme Court. They intend to give statehood to Puerto Rico and D.C., and conservatives and fiscal hawks will never have power in Washington, D.C. again. I think this is a dangerous scheme with no chance of success.
Robbie, your closing argument. Go ahead, sir.
I think as long as the presidency and probably the Senate remain in Republican hands, the worst thing that Democrats could do with a little bit more power would be largely thwarted. If this convinces Republicans they need to get serious about fulfilling their promises, I would argue it'd be worth it. I understand why people might see it a different way. But going back to the fundamental question of third parties, a one-party system would be awful. A two-party system isn't as bad as a one-party system, but it's still pretty bad. The more choice and control you have over your politics, just like your decision-making in real life, the better your life will be.
Yeah, some say we have a one-party system right now. Mark, Robbie, counselors, thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it. A very, very insightful conversation.
Again, our good friend Mark Meckler. Mark is the president of the Convention of States. That is also his website, conventionofstates.com. Mark is one of the, well, I would say the hawks for our freedom. And he and his organization do an amazing job. You need to get a hold of it and get the little booklet dealing with the Convention of States. Brother Mark, good to see you, buddy. How are you?
I'm good. Good to be with you. Hey, thanks for bringing up the plight of the family farmer. We've got him in our family, and we know how rough it is out there.
Yeah, I come from that background, and we need to wake up with it. I mean, it's more serious than perhaps we realize.
Yeah, my son married into a farm family in Missouri, and so we get kind of an intimate look inside of operating a large family farm. And even the title of the book was so apropos. I understand these guys have lots of land and people look at them like they're wealthy people, but they've got the land, and then the operating costs on these farms are incredible. The risk is super high. And I think we better start paying attention before we lose that resource in our country.
Amen to that. Sorry for the technical problems earlier, so I only have you for one segment. But let me just ask you this. Given your background, your love, your passion for this country, how do we, in the true sense of the word, from your perspective, regain self-government?
Well, I think we have the tools to regain self-governance, and it's really an attitude about who's in charge in the country. And to put it in a biblical sense, Perry, when I first became a Christian, I read Romans 13, and then we're supposed to essentially follow the governing authorities and do what they say. I didn't like it because I'm a rebel. And then one of my friends explained to me, well, we're the governing authorities in the United States of America. The people are sovereign. And so the question is, do we do the things that we have to do to take control? Of course, one of those is vote. And I encourage everybody, if you're not voting, you're not doing your basic civic duty. But there's so much more we can do. We can hold our elected officials accountable. We can talk to them regularly. We can pay attention to what's going on in the legislature. We can run for office ourselves. We can help people run. And then, of course, my passion is we can call a convention of states to restrain the federal government and return the power to the people in the states.
Do you see an awakening for that?
Yeah, I do. I see self-governance coming up all over the country. And by the way, it's on both the left and the right. I, of course, come from the right, but I do see people on the left who feel the same way. They want to take charge of their own lives and their own destiny. And one of the things that we're talking about here, Perry, is the idea of federalism, that New York should be New York. If they want to elect Mondami, I think that's insane that they would consider doing that. But that's up to New York City. And I think Texas should be left to be Texas. We do that by taking the power away from the federal government and giving it back to the people. Then the states can be themselves. Local jurisdictions can be more themselves. And then I think what it comes down to ultimately, and this is something I've been grappling with lately, is really a fight between urban areas and rural areas. The politics, the culture, the people are very different in those two different types of areas across all the states.
We call those concrete cowboys.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I had this thought this week, Perry. I've been this month 3 times in Colorado, and just driving all over Colorado, from the most rural parts of Colorado where you see Trump signs everywhere, you see churches everywhere, faith is open everywhere. And then you go into Denver, which is exactly the opposite. And in my mind, I'm grappling with this question: how do you deal with that when the urban areas rule the politics of the state and they rule over the rural areas? How do we deal with that situation? I don't have a good answer to that, but I'm working on it.
Well, isn't that the issue? I mean, if you look down to just the battle of the states, in states that are in play at the last minute of election, there are always these states that have these large cities.
Yeah, and the large cities, of course, tend to skew more liberal, more Democrat. And there's a reason for that. I think it's actually a logical reason if I'm trying to be empathetic to my opposition. And that is, if you live in a city, you require a lot more regulation. If people are closely packed together, living together, you need more regulations. A great example is you need a sound ordinance in a city that keeps you from playing music late at night. If you live in a rural state like Montana, in most places in Montana, it doesn't matter. You might disturb your cows, but you're not going to disturb anybody else. And so different types of regulations are appropriate for different kinds of jurisdictions. The question is, how do we split a state apart in a way that makes that work?
Again, Mark, I apologize for the short visit, but let me come back to your passion, the Convention of States. And I know you got more and more states looking into this. Give us an update.
Yeah, so there are currently 19 and a half states that have passed the Convention of States resolution. I say half because North Carolina's passed it in their House. The pressure's on to get it done in the Senate. I would encourage any of you that might be watching from North Carolina, contact your senators, ask them to pass the resolution. We keep passing it in the House. I think the Senate's conservative. They just keep refusing to bring it up. So that would take us to state number 20. That obviously would be a big threshold on our way to 34.
That's wonderful. So here we are, 249, heading to 250 next year, which is going to be pretty incredible. And the first 6 months of this new administration has almost been consequential in so many ways. What's your 30,000-foot view?
Yeah, I think this is the most consequential president, certainly in my lifetime, maybe in modern American history. I would argue more consequential than Reagan, and I'm a huge fan of Reagan, so it's hard for me to say that. But Trump is actually getting more done and pursuing more aggressive, conservative, America First policy than anybody in history. You only have to look at what's going on in the Middle East, what's going on with job creation, what's going on with real wages, what's going on in our economy right now. This guy has a big vision for making America great again, and he's executing on that vision. I hope to see him continue that. By the way, SCOTUS ruling in this week and stopping these nationwide injunctions is going to help accelerate that agenda. I'm looking forward to the next 3 years.
So that decision alone, and 3 hours, 4 hours ago, the BBB gets through.
Yeah.
This is big stuff. What's your take on the bill?
Okay, I mean, I think I have a philosophy, which is a bill can be big and it can be beautiful, but it can't be big and beautiful. And so I don't love it, but I also am a political realist, and I believe that's the best we could possibly do under the circumstances. It does something that's critically important, which is preserve the Trump tax cuts from his first administration. Without that, I think the economy would have cratered. So that was sort of the primary goal. There's some other good things that happen in this bill as well. I don't want to sell it short. But there's also a lot of garbage in the bill, and we're going to have to elect a whole bunch of better people and call a convention of states if we want to get control of some of the things like this long-term spending problem.
Well, let me say to our viewers and listeners, go to Mark's website, conventionofstates.com, order up the little booklet there on the amendment there, and I tell you what, he sends them out by the dozens, and you can pass them around. If you're having meetings with maybe within your, local committees, get a handful of these and hand them out by going to conventionofstates.com. Mark, I want to say thank you for your passion and your friendship as we head into the fourth. It feels like we have hope again.
I've got a lot of hope. Of course, as a Christian, I've always got hope, but I have hope for our country here in the short term. I think things are turning around, and thanks to guys like you, Perry. You're out there on the air talking about this stuff all the time. Thank you for being in the fight.
Program. It's the Vicki McKenna show. So I've often had Mark Meckler on the program to talk about the Convention of States. I never thought that I would have Mark Meckler on the program to talk about the Convention of States being somehow twisted into some kind of, weird cult-like, militia organization. It seems to be what we're going to have to talk about, Mark. First thing I don't understand is why this is an Amazon Prime show that's attacking you guys. It's ostensibly about the Duggar family. I don't understand why. I mean, that show's been off the air for 10 years. I don't understand why Netflix is doing a show attacking the Duggar family, but in the process of doing that, they decided, I think we need to take aim at Mark Meckler and Convention of States. How the heck did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to how it happened. Somebody sent a clip to me, and really amazing. So this show is called Shiny Happy People, which seems to be about neither. And last season, apparently, it attacked the Duggar family. I think this is just part of mainstream American culture on the left coming out of Hollywood. Anything they can do to attack Christians, to make Christians look bad, that's what they're going to do. They're going to elevate any scandal they can. So they did that with the Duggar family. Well, this season, apparently, the show is about some kind of teen Christian camp back in the 90s or something that I've never even heard of. But in the middle of the show, we have nothing to do with this teen Christian camp. I don't know anything about it. In the middle of the show, they cut to Convention of States and how bad Convention of States is, holding us up as some sort of attempt to reinstate the new Confederacy, to reinstate slavery, to burn down the Constitution.
What?
Yeah, it's pretty extraordinary stuff.
So my understanding of this show is that I guess it's season to season, it changes its targets. So now it's targeting some teen Christian camp. And so now Convention of States is all about, I guess, reestablishing slavery. I've known you for a long time, man. You are as libertarian as they get, but, and I've never, I followed you. I've seen you on social media. I don't even understand how you get there. But I'll tell you one thing. This suggests that we're going to have entertainment stay woke for a while. But let's talk about Convention of States. What is it? Because people are going to get the wrong idea, and they're going to think their parents who sent money or signed up for the Convention of States, suddenly their parents are like closet Confederates or something.
Yeah, the entire goal of Convention of States is to take power away from Washington, D.C., and return it to the states and the people. I mean, that's really, at its simplest, that's all it is. It's not even partisan. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about Wisconsin or California or Texas. The goal is to limit the scope, the power, and the jurisdiction of Washington, D.C., and to take that power and send it back where it belongs to the states. Also to impose term limits, which most people support, and not just on Congress, but on the deep state. And also to impose some kind of balanced budget amendment, some kind of fiscal sanity in Washington, D.C. Everything that we're talking about are supported by 2/3 to 3/4 of folks in the United States at a minimum. So there's nothing fringe about it. There's nothing radical about it. It's in the Constitution, and these guys are saying it's going to destroy the Constitution. Literally, Article 5 of the Constitution contains the way that we amend. One of the ways is when 2/3 of the states want to gather in convention and propose amendments, they do so. That's the process we're using. So far, 19 of the requisite 34 states have called for this convention. Literally, absolutely nothing radical about it. To the contrary, it is purely constitutional.
Yeah. So I don't. Yeah. And most of the people who support the idea for two basic reasons. One is term limits, and the other one is the balanced budget, because we are $37 trillion in debt. We have octogenarians who are announcing they intend to run again for their 18th or 20th term. The idea that these same people who have never reined in their own power over the entire time they've been in Congress will just get together and vote 2/3 to say, let's amend the Constitution. I mean, don't hold your breath because you'll pass out. That's just that's an idiotic thing to think. So the only way to do it is Article 5. That's it. That's the only option we've got if we want to rein in spending, if we want to rein in what has become a career track for wealth creation using government. It's pretty much all we've got left.
Yeah, and if you look at what just happened in Congress, we got this one big, beautiful bill. I would argue that bills can be either big or beautiful, but not both. And this one, I don't like it. I think it's the best we could get under the circumstances. I hate that, but I don't like the bill. I don't like all the gross pork in there and all the terrible spending. It does not reduce our debt and our deficit. And so if we want to fix that stuff, then we're going to have to do it ourselves. The critters in Washington, D.C. are never going to do it. And look, I think Donald Trump is doing an extraordinary job as a president. He can't do it because presidents don't have the power to fix the stuff that needs to be fixed. That power was reserved to us in the states, and we're going to have to exercise that
That's
power.
100% true. And, every liberal should support this as well. They may not agree with what kinds of, government policy that you might support, but how can you be against a balanced budget? How can you be against not destroying the future generations with so much debt they'll never be able to do anything except maybe rent from the government, right? How can you be against that if you're a liberal? How can you be against term limits? I mean, especially these young wide-eyed commies who can't stand the fact that they've got a bunch of old boomers occupying seats in Congress. They're griping about it constantly at this point. So why not sign up? Why not join us? Because this benefits both sides of the political aisle.
Yeah, and my experience is that they are for it. If you sit down and talk to them about it, and you talk about term limits or balancing the budget or even taking power away from D.C. and giving it back to the people, they are for these things. That is precisely the reason that you see a show like Shiny Happy People attacking us, because the status quo folks, they're worried about the fact that their people, liberals, conservatives, independents, libertarians, are for this. We've done the polling again. It's 2/3 to 3/4 Americans, depending on where you're at, are for everything that we're talking about. And so they have to use the media and the culture to try to attack it.
You know what suddenly makes me wonder if maybe James O'Keefe could get on something like this and find out whether the government was communicating with the producers of this series to take shots at Convention of States, because it just doesn't fit. There's nothing religious about it. Zero. There's nothing religious about it. I mean, if you want there to be something religious about it, you're going to be disappointed, because it has nothing to do with anybody's religion, not any sect, not any overarching thing, nothing. And so that makes me wonder whether somebody was an advisor, maybe paid for through USAID or some such thing like that, to take shots at you guys in a way that just makes zero sense. I was watching an interview with Tucker Carlson last night with a guy named Trevor Milton. Everybody should watch this thing. And what you find out is that the government has consolidated so much power that even the limited, the protections we have in the Constitution, so one of those is not being able to have them use rigged venues to try to put people in prison. And they completely, ignored that to try to take a guy from Arizona and try him in the Southern District of New York so they could put him in prison for the rest of his life. So, that's how eroded our Constitution has become, that you're thinking, what judge signed off on that crap? But they did. And so there's really nothing you can do to stop that unless you have a powerful executive who's paying attention, and we don't always have that.
No, we haven't right now, thank God. I'm really proud of 99% of what Donald Trump is doing. But the bottom line is that will switch back, and it'll switch back to totalitarianism.
Yes.
The second that we have a leftist administration, and that's our history. Like, we can pray for more conservative, more libertarian administration, but that's not going to happen permanently. And so the way you make the permanent changes, the things that actually get etched in stone, essentially, are the things that go in the Constitution. And there are things that we can do to protect ourselves over the long term.
What are some of the other elements that people have been talking about? I don't think many would make it, because that's the big fear that the people on the right have. We always got to talk about this, is that there'll be a runaway convention, which, if you look at the process of how the Constitution is amended using Article 5, it doesn't even seem like it may be like getting struck by lightning on the tip of your big toe while dancing on the top of a mountain and surviving it. That seems to be like the likelihood that this would be a runaway convention.
Yeah, I think it's more likely that it's hard to get things done, and I agree with you. And this is important. The only things that are going to get done are the things that are very mainstream and very accepted by most people. So we talked about term limits. We talked about balanced budget. Here's a good one. The vast majority of the American people want the Supreme Court limited to 9 justices. The left is talking about packing the court, doing away with the filibuster, et cetera. You can stop that permanently, and almost everybody supports that. Let's just be done with that idea. It's a crazy idea, because both sides would just go back and forth and do it. Let's just stop that by fixing the Supreme Court at 9. Another one is the idea of anchor babies, that anybody can come here, have a baby here, and that baby's automatically a citizen, clearly not intended by the 14th Amendment, clearly been abused. And we could just say, no, it's not intended for that. There's no such thing as anchor babies under the 14th Amendment. So there's some very simple things. Here's another one, Vicki, that everybody likes. Stop it with the 2,000-page bills already. Single subject amendment. One subject, one bill, put a page limitation on it. But stop doing these monster bills that nobody can read and nobody knows what's in them.
That's what empowers the deep state, by the way, because then we let the bureaucrats write the rules that implement the bill. And so a 2,000-page bill becomes a 2,800-page document that nobody reads, that is implementing the 2,000 pages that nobody read. So one-page bills, everybody has to be able to read them. I would also, and again, this is just me, I would like actual formal debate. I would like to have people debate things again, Mark. I would like to see testimony, public testimony, not just, hand-picked superstars, but public testimony where we get to weigh in, like we can occasionally at legislative level. So these are the radical ideas we're talking about, folks.
Yeah, the one you just talked about is so important to me. If you watch debate on the floor of the Senate or the House, there's almost nobody in the room.
Never.
It's just that all it is a soundbite for somebody.
Bloviating.
And I think they should all have to sit in there and listen to and watch and respond to all the debates.
I agree. And you know what? If it takes a little longer, if you've got to schedule extra days for public testimony, big deal. So there's all kinds of, really common sense things that maybe a lot of people would agree with. And here's how it would work, right? You'd get together, you debate what you want in your state. And all the other states would do that. And then you get together and then you debate what everybody wanted. And 2/3 would have to say yes.
Yeah, 2/3 have to say yes just to get to a convention. And then in the convention itself, the way it works is they'll debate at the convention, and a simple majority has to say yes. And when they do, and this is really important for people who might be afraid, when they do, it's only a suggestion. Or if that convention has no power to do anything except for make suggestions to the states to say, hey, we think the Supreme Court should be limited to 9. What do you think? That goes out to the states. And then it takes 3/4 of states, an even higher bar, to ratify anything that comes out of that convention. So the idea that something crazy could get into convention, come out of convention, and get ratified is just ridiculous.
Yeah. In fact, what makes me sad, because some of my ideas, which are very common sense, probably would never make the cut. I appreciate the time on the program, but folks, if you're out there and you're seeing this advertised and it's popped up in my social feeds, this shiny happy people story, this is just, it's propaganda. You can skip it. There are much better things, not only better things, but more entertaining things than just watching yet another likely government-driven, anti-liberty, anti-Christian screed on Amazon Prime. So.